We continue our discussion on astrology and the mystic path. And today we're going to discuss the planet Saturn. Saturn is considered to be the greatest planet, and we'll see why for various reasons. But as we approach this study of Saturn, we want to take some time to consider, what does Saturn represent within the chart? And we also need to consider the fact and remember that all planets are important, that all planets are an important aspect of your consciousness. We have benefic planets, we have malefic planets. They all have a role to play for us in this life. And so in order to really access the mystical part of astrology, we need to learn to incorporate all of the planets, to understand all of the planets, to love and welcome all of the planets, because they are us. They are an aspect of our own consciousness. And when we can honor each aspect of our own consciousness, then we are whole, then we are free. Then whether we are in this body, or whether we are off in some astral or causal plane, we are, again, whole. We are present, we are free, we are effective, we are functional no matter where we are. And beyond all of the fortune telling and wow factor of astrology, the real important part of astrology is that underlying philosophy which reveals to us our inner wholeness. And that's what this whole series has been about. Now, again, I'm going to be referring to the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2. The chapter on Logitatia Vashtas, which is chapter 10, as well as the appendix that deal with the indications of each planet through all houses, all Vargas. These help us to understand how a planet functions. And so what are some general representations of Saturn? Saturn deals with our elder siblings, deals with prison, longevity, the connective tissue in the body, the immune system, our pets, our servants, hard work, debts, loss, illness, duty, weaknesses, focus, and perseverance. Saturn represents within our life all that is inevitable, all that is inevitable. And what makes Saturn the greatest planet in regards to our awakening process is that if we can make peace with Saturn, we make peace with what is inevitable. And when you are at peace with what is inevitable, you are at peace. And that is essentially what we're aiming for when it comes to the exploration of our mystical path. What does yoga direct us towards? Well, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, at the outset, yoga is the cessation or the ending of the fluctuations and changes in consciousness. Throughout the Yoga Sutras and other yogic texts, there's an emphasis on the yogi is to endure pleasure and pain while seeking knowledge. Making peace with opposites, releasing attachment and aversion. This comes up again and again. And what is the thing that most people are so averse to? The inevitable. The inevitable, which is what? Illness, death, difficulty, delays, life, the changes that occur in life. We are most averse to this. And this is one of the reasons why many yogis can be found in crematoriums where you see bodies being brought and burnt. Why? Because that is bringing into your awareness as obviously as possible the inevitable experience that all of us as humans are going to deal with. Saturn is a planet which can help us relate appropriately to this human condition. Relate appropriately to this human condition. And if you can relate appropriately to this human condition, you can be free. You can be free. So again, with this whole discussion of mysticism of astrology, really what we're trying to do here is see what is the highest functioning of the planet, or what is the clearest expression of a planet? What is the clearest expression of a planet? We need Saturn. Saturn deals with the immune system. Saturn also deals with the lymphatic system. Saturn deals with excretion. Saturn deals with sanitation. If you've ever thought about it, sanitation, or to sanitize something. Well, if you break that word down, we have S-A-N-I, which is a name for Saturn, Shani. So it should be you're shanitizing something. You are cleaning it up. Saturn is that which cleans things. Crows are related to Saturn. So vultures can be related to Saturn. But these are what? They come and they clean up dead things. And when things are removed, which are no longer useful, well, that keeps the health of the environment, keeps the health of your body going strong. So Saturn is necessary. We can learn so much about Saturn if we simply study Saturn's placements and what he means from an astrological perspective. For example, Saturn has Digbala, or directional strength, in the 7th house of the chart, in the 7th house of a chart. And what that shows us, the 7th house deals with other people, projections, things outside of ourselves. Having directional strength means Saturn can do his work best in the 7th house, which means that you're not going to get too caught up in your projections of other people. You're not going to become overly dependent on other people. Now, we live in communities and we are communal creatures, so we're not talking about becoming hermits or renunciates, because in order for society to function, in order for us to have this experience of life, we do have to relate. But most of the problems that we have in relationships is by getting too attached to others, too in other people's business. And when Saturn is in that 7th house, what that helps us to see is, when is it appropriate to be involved in someone's life? When is it appropriate to stay by oneself? When is it appropriate to let go of things? Now, not everyone is going to have Saturn in the 7th house or close to the 7th house, but we can begin to reflect upon this and work this understanding into our own life. That way, we are effectively changing our karma. So if we were to pass on tomorrow and be reborn the next day, and we've been working with this Saturn, well, possibly our next chart, using the theory of reincarnation, Saturn will be a little bit closer to the 7th house. We also know Saturn is exalted in Libra, which is what? The natural 7th house of the zodiac. The natural 7th house of the zodiac. Many people wonder, why is Saturn exalted here? Well, there's a few reasons. Number one, it's the natural 7th house of the zodiac. Libra is a sign that deals with trade and exchange. We learn this very intimately in the Asheville Vedic Astrology apprenticeship program, when we spend, well, about 6 weeks of time just looking at the Rashis themselves, and then, of course, the Grahas and the planets. But the 7th house is right before the 8th house. It's right before we get into that most intimate aspect of ourselves, our most intimate psychology, the 8th house of the natural 8th house of Scorpio. And so it's at the 7th where we have trade and exchange. And in order to have trade and exchange, you have to have loss. You have to give something. You have to let go of things. Otherwise, there's no trade and no exchange. So Saturn is exalted in the natural 7th house of the zodiac because it's allowing us to see when it's time to let go of things, to see the inevitable cycles of nature, the inevitable cycles of experience, the inevitable cycles of relationship. It's when we cling and we attach ourselves beyond its time that things become old. They become dogmas. They become dead, essentially. So as we see in nature, there is always this cycle of rebirth, of gaining and losing and gaining and losing. And Saturn gives us the perspective to appreciate that, So again, when we think about yogis meditating on death, or yogis meditating in a cremation ground, what are they doing? They're putting themselves right there to see the reality of Saturn, because we are all going to experience that at some point. Maybe due to our modern culture or modern medicine, or technology, we believe that it's not going to come our way. But it all comes our way eventually. And the fact that we ignore it, that's what makes it so hard, because it smacks us in the face and nearly breaks our neck, because we're not even prepared for it. We have a weak neck in a way. But when individuals have faced death or have moved through illness, these are some extremely strong people, because they see the reality of life and the reality of the human condition. And oftentimes they can be the most peaceful of people, because they know that plants within the garden are going to grow, give their fruits, wither, and die. They don't latch on to a flower and say, you must live forever. They know there will be another season, because they have this ability to understand trade and exchange, which is related to Saturn's, I don't want to use the word ideal, it's just, Saturn in Libra represents the highest functioning, if you might think of it that way, of what Saturn can do. So when we begin to understand the realities of life and live with that understanding, we become balanced. We do not get disturbed when illness comes our way, because we are in the moment. We are in the now. We're not doing a Rahu thing here, where we are imagining every other illness that could possibly come our way, and therefore overloading our minds and becoming even more stressed and anxious. What we're doing is we are saying, I'm sick now. Well, what is appropriate? What is the right thing to do in this moment? What is the truthful thing to do in this moment? Remember, Saturn rules over truthfulness. What is the truthful thing to do in this moment? It's to take care of myself, to rest a little bit, to take the medicine that I need to take, and not be upset about the fact that I'm sick or I shouldn't be sick. Well, you're a human being. Animals get sick. If you let an animal live long enough, if you keep it in captivity and you give it everything it needs, eventually it's going to die anyway from a heart attack or cancer, because the DNA breaks down and it just can't do it anymore. So Saturn is about breaking down those fantasies of immortality, the fantasies of physical immortality. But that is the beauty of Saturn, because it breaks down the fantasies of physical immortality. But if you pay attention, the power of Saturn can teach you what is immortal, which is spirit, which is that we can think of it as that witnessing consciousness which observes everything that we experience, the good, the bad, the illness, the sickness, the health, the well-being, the death, all of it. It goes through all of that like a thread through beads on a necklace. And what most people do is they continuously avoid the messages of Saturn. And Saturn, if we think about Saturn in relationship to the zodiac, well, or I should say in relationship to the solar system, Saturn is the furthest planet out in regards to the personal planets. Now we still have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. We can consider those to be transpersonal. But as far as the personal planets, which represent us as individuals, individual beings with a body, a mind, and so on, personality, Saturn is the final planet. And that's because Saturn is the final thing you have to get through in order to go beyond the small sense of self, in order to wake up to your true nature. So we can see, when it comes to mysticism, Saturn is a profound planet. But it's profound in the sense that it's going to force you to pay attention to your everyday life. Saturn is routine. Saturn is duty. Saturn is perseverance. Saturn is truthfulness. Many people, when they get interested in spirituality, they have this wonderful, exaggerated idea that they're going to somehow learn a meditation technique and be able to sit in lotus posture and be absorbed in this bliss, which to them is really just, you might as well just give them some morphine or some good drugs. That's what they think it's going to be like. But if they are serious about it, and if they grow beyond that stage, what they start to realize is that the spiritual practice, life is that spiritual practice. That being able to be truthful with others, to have integrity, to be authentic, these are all Saturn things. This is why people who have prominent Saturn, they're not usually pretentious. They usually don't like to waste time with useless words. They're not good at flattery. They just want to get right to business because they want to interact with what is real right now. They're not interested in getting dressed up. Saturn is the most natural planet. It rules over animals, and animals are natural. Most people don't think about Saturn as being related to sexuality, but Saturn actually is, because it's a natural impulse, it's a natural urge, but hopefully, ideally, a healthy one. So being able to be appropriate in every moment, in every situation, with truthfulness, with integrity, and with honesty, that is what strengthens Saturn. Because if you can do that, you can get through anything. You can understand anything. You can bear any burden. And Saturn is the planet that helps you bear burdens. When it comes to cruel planets, we need the cruel planets. If I'm going to do something with an individual in this world, I'm going to choose someone with a good Saturn and a good Mars over someone with a good Venus or a good Jupiter any day. Why? Because if their Saturn and Mars is well placed, I know I can count on them. I know that they're going to do their duty, they're going to persevere through difficulties, they're not going to quit on me. I know that they're going to be logical and precise, which is a Martian trait, versus someone who might have a prominent Jupiter that's not well supported. It looks good, maybe it's exalted, maybe it's even in the 9th house, but they don't have well-placed cruel planets. And so what happens? The moment a difficulty arises, they don't know what to do because they've never dealt with it before. They're crushed, or they're overwhelmed, or they think, well, this should just work out, versus doing what Saturn and Mars would do, which would be figure out how to get through it or to persevere through it. So Saturn and Mars gives us this ability to be functional in this world. And many people think that we're meant to escape this world. That's not true. Why would we even come here if we're meant to escape it? We can think of it as kind of a learning ground. And what are we learning to do? We're learning to embody virtues. We're learning to be sattvic. And some people can think of Saturn as being tamasic, which he is. Simply means that he's able to deal with problems and move through problems. But what's one of the hardest things for people to do when it comes to approaching life? To stay true to their who they are as an authentic being, to be true to their boundaries, to do their duty, to do what they say they're going to do. In order to do that, you need some tamas to ground you. So Saturn gives that capacity to say, all right, I want to wake up. I want to interact appropriately with the wholeness of life. I've read what these yogis say. I've read that they say, here's the kind of routines that you do. Here's the techniques that you do. Here's how you approach life. You interact with life in a harmless fashion, a truthful fashion, without possessiveness, without attachment or aversion. And Saturn will say, that's not going to be easy, because it's not. But the Saturn within you will say, that's okay. I can endure while I figure out how to do this. Versus the other side of that, where you read maybe Autobiography of a Yogi, or you read some other text which is really inspiring for you, but then you have someone point out to you that Yogananda spent years in meditation with Sri Yukteswar, who disciplined him in regards to his diet, his time, how he interacted with the world. And they think about that and they're like, well, no, I can't do that. Only Yogananda could do that. Well, Yogananda was an impetuous, whim-filled person as well, even though he was profoundly inspired spiritually. But through developing discipline, through developing routine, he grew strong. And his life then was able to reflect those yogic ideals, and then he was able to realize the truth of things. So this is what Saturn does for us. And in order to tap into Saturn, there's a few things that you can do. And again, they're not typically going to be easy unless you already have a prominent activated Saturn within your chart. But that doesn't mean that you ignore it. You have to work on it. You have to work on it. You're going to have to work on it eventually, so you might as well start now. Number one, having a regular routine. Having a regular routine. Going to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time, eating meals at the same time. Of course, you make exceptions for extreme circumstances, but you don't make exceptions all the time. You don't make excuses. A person who's good at making excuses is not a good person to be around. So you don't want to be that person. Saturn will not look kindly upon someone who makes excuses. Why do people have such difficult times when they go through their Sati Sati or Saturn return, or difficult Saturn dashas? Probably because they're not doing their duty. They can't persevere, or they're good at making excuses versus doing what's required of them. So finding ways now, before you are actually in a stressful situation, finding ways now to begin training yourself to get on a regular schedule, to be accountable, to be responsible. Why is this so useful? Because once you are established in a sense of integrity like that, when difficulties come your way, you're still solid. You can still endure it and get up and do your work and get up and meditate and take care of what needs to be taken care of, versus someone who might be ruled over by a prominent Venus or Jupiter without good support, who they're good as long as things are going well. As long as their luck is flowing, as long as the beauty is there and the being taken care of is there, they're fine. But the moment a storm comes through, or the moment something comes through that knocks them off balance, they completely spin out of control and lose it. Saturn is that anchor. Saturn is that anchor which allows us to keep moving forward, and we develop that through practice. One of the best things for you to do is start meditating once a day and lock that time in. I'm going to meditate once a day from 7 a.m. to 7:20, and you do it every day, no matter what. Or I'm going to meditate every day from 9 until 9:30 p.m. right before I go to sleep. And you do it every day. No matter what football game is on, no matter what show is on, no matter what party is going on, you decide you're going to do it. And that generates this power of Saturn. And you even become more dependable. People actually appreciate you more, because once you master that, you start seeing that you can do that in other areas of life. You move out of the teenager stage. And Saturn doesn't like young people, usually because they have no sense of duty or responsibility. You become an adult. This is why Saturn works better as you get older. This is why people who have taken the time to be responsible, to be structured, to be disciplined early in life tend to not have so much difficulty with the Sati Sati or the Saturn return period, because they already know what to do. They already know how to stay true to a path. So you have to find ways to challenge yourself. And you might have to start small, because I realize that it's not easy to do this at first. But you might have to start small and then build up. And eventually, as the years go by, you become like a freight train of perseverance and integrity. And that's a wonderful thing, because then you are able to be more compassionate to others, to be more helpful to others, to be that useful servant to others. Because you no longer are caught up in, well, what does my little personality or ego want to do? You do what is appropriate. Saturn is about truth. Saturn is about attuning to truth. So we need to start with something small like that. You might need to challenge yourself, put yourself in difficult situations that do overwhelm you, and then learn that you can get through them. The reason I advise this is because you can wait around until life does it to you, and it will. But then, that's when it counts. And if you haven't already practiced to deal with overwhelming situations, who knows what's going to happen? You might make worse karmas for yourself. So that is why challenging yourself now with discipline, with doing things you don't want to do, growing out of that adolescent stage, will prepare you for being able to deal with anything. And wouldn't that be wonderful? Imagine if you had the faith, because personally I think Saturn is a planet of faith. Many people don't think of that, but again, if you can handle Saturn and what Saturn represents, you can handle anything. And in order to handle that, you have to have some kind of faith. So faith develops by finding out how strong you are. I keep using the example of a teenager because, well, I've interacted with some teenagers, and they get overwhelmed at the simplest things. You try to get them to sweep the floor, or be responsible for scooping the poop in a cat litter box. And if they've never done it before, all of a sudden they're like, but I don't know if I can do that every day. That's too much responsibility. And here I am, after years of doing it, thinking, it's not that hard. You just get up and you do it. But that's because I've done it so much, those kinds of little chores and things. And so what do? You meet that teenager and you say, look, I know you're overwhelmed, but hey, rather than cry about it for a half hour, why don't we just go sweep the floor together and see how long it takes? And then through the whatever stress, the teenager sweeps the floor, and it takes 5 minutes. And then the teenager says, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then, of course, there's still a little resistance, but you keep showing them until eventually they know there's no problem. You just do it. One of the reasons it's recommended for people to volunteer, say, for hospice or to serving people who are ill as a remedy for Saturn. Well, if you can do that freely and with presence, you start seeing the nature of life, what's going to happen to all of us at some point in time. And then, yes, some people are going to have really bad illnesses. Some people are going to have really bad deaths. Some people are going to have good deaths. Some people are going to have easy illnesses. And you're going to see, well, life just keeps happening this way. And then when you get sick, you don't take it so seriously. It just passes and you move on. You do what you need to do. This shows you what you are capable of. This shows you what you truly are, that you are not this body. You are not this mind. You are not this personality. You are that which runs underneath of it. And it's by understanding the truth of Saturn that we're able to do that. So not shying away from responsibility. Not shying away from responsibility. Not shying away from the things that are gross in life, that you consider gross, or the things that you would rather keep your distance from. Make peace with those. Make peace with those things. And you can be at peace with almost anything then. It's easy to be at peace with angels, and it's easy to be at peace with birthday cake ice cream. It's easy to be at peace with beautiful flower beds. But when you see death around you and illness around you and it crushes you, well, what if you just made peace with it? Then you are going to be at peace whether there's birthday cake ice cream or whether you happen to see someone passing before you that you love dearly. Again, I don't want to encourage people to think that I'm saying that you don't experience grief. You welcome grief. You don't experience fear. You welcome fear if it's there. Now, if it's a psychological complex or something that is a psychological imbalance, well, you work with a counselor to deal with that. But if someone that you love dearly is passing before you, Saturn is there to grieve. Saturn is there for the sorrow of that loss. Saturn is the ability to embrace that change, that death, that Saturn in the 7th house, that Saturn in Libra, and to feel it, because that is a natural part of the human experience. And our issue is we don't want to feel it. We want to push the grief away. We want to push the sadness away. We want to think that shouldn't be there. But thinking the issues of Saturn shouldn't be there are just going to make you more and more neurotic. But if someone's passing before you and you can't bear it, well, cry your eyeballs out for however many months or years it takes. But eventually, maybe start to reflect upon the processes of life. And maybe start to reflect upon the people that are still around you, or the people that you can maybe help and bring a little bit of joy to, or volunteer to help others who are going through grief, to help them walk through it because you've walked through it, not to change them, not to take that grief away from them, but to be there with them as a presence, as a truthful, authentic presence with integrity. If there's fear, it's okay. A hero isn't someone who doesn't feel fear. A hero is someone who feels the fear and then does what they need to do. But again, it's part of the learning of, okay, I feel fear. This body feels fear. I am not this fear. What am I? I am spirit, which will require some more internal work, some more internal meditation and contemplation. But you do that on your own time. But when something occurs in your life and it brings fear, you're familiar with it. This is fear. What do? Do I crumple and not move forward? Or do I do my best to walk through the fear? Saturn will help you walk you through the fear. Saturn won't take the fear away. See, this is the important part we have to remember. When we think about mystical paths or spirituality or working with planets well, we often think that by working with them, they're going to take away the stuff that is part of the human condition. No, they give you the strength to participate, to be here fully, completely, in all of its sorrows and all of its glories and all of its downtime and all of its activity. It gives you the strength to be appropriate in these things. So again, to return to this process, having a routine, being disciplined, developing some kind of structure, even if it's going to the gym every couple days, find something, start building upon that. Again, when I interact with people, who do I want to work with? Do I want to work with some free spirit artist type who I probably can't depend on at all? No. Or do I want to work with someone who I know they take care of themselves? They go to the gym every day. They're not flaky. They do their duty whether they want to or not. You can count on them. We need, as human beings, we need to be able to count on each other to do our best. And of course, some things will be so unbearable that we can't function. But most of the time we are a lot stronger than we think we are. And it's the strength of Saturn, the perseverance of Saturn that gives us that. So if you are a devotionally inclined person, well, do mantras to Saturn. Read the greatness of Saturn every Saturday. Study it. Consider what are the lessons in the greatness of Saturn. There are so many good ones in there. Do mantras to Saturn, and if you're going through difficulties, don't ask Saturn to take them away from you. Ask Saturn, welcome the strength to walk through them, to learn from them. Because then that's what makes you stronger. Not having them taken away, but the ability to embrace and move through them. If you're going through grief, feel the grief. Ask Saturn for the capacity to fully feel, embrace, experience the grief, the reality of it. Again, not to identify with it, not to define your sense of self by it, not to be the person that walks around and talks about their problems all the time. That's not a good Saturn. Saturn's not going to talk about his problems all the time. He's just going to go through his problems. Of course, you might need to talk to a counselor from time to time to remain mentally sane, but once you are strong, you know the difference between just dealing with problems of life, illness, death, difficulty, loss, obstruction. They all happen. They happen to all of us, no matter who you are. Or when you become obsessed with it and that's all you can see. Remember, we have the other planets too. So Saturn helps us move through these difficulties, to see the problems and move through them, but we do still need Venus to appreciate the beauty and love in life, Jupiter to appreciate the bigger picture, the Sun to experience our inspiration, Mercury to manage all these things. They all need to be there. So I'm not in any way saying focus specifically on one. I'm saying you have to approach them all. So again, this sense of responsibility, discipline, because once you have responsibility and discipline, you will be dependable, responsible, and you can move through many things that most other people can't. Another is truthfulness. You've probably heard me talk about this many, many times whenever I've mentioned Saturn and other experiences. Truthfulness is one of the most profound virtues of Saturn, and it's a profound mystical and yogic virtue as well, satya. Why is this? Well, the story I always like to tell, I read it in one of the appendix of The Greatness of Saturn I used to read often. There's a story of a man who was getting ready to go through his Sati Sati period. And Saturn came along and basically said, hey, I'm getting ready to come into your life, so get ready. And all of a sudden these virtues started pouring out of this man's chest. And all these virtues started to leave because they didn't want to be there when Saturn was getting ready to do his thing to the individual's life. But truth was the last one to fly out of his heart. And the man reached up and grabbed truth and said, look, of all the virtues, the rest of them can go, but you have to stay with me. You have to be here with me. And truth agreed to stay through the Sati Sati period. So truth went back into the person's heart. And then all of the other virtues said, well, if truth's not going anywhere, we're not going anywhere either. We go wherever truth goes. And so all the other virtues came back. And as the man went through his Sati Sati period, he was able to deal with the difficulties and come out the other side. And why is truthfulness so important? Because again, Saturn is about reality, the inevitable of the human experience, of the human condition, and what we are as spirit related to the human condition. When Saturn is exaggerated and not well supported, all the person will see is the human condition. They'll just see the rotting things, the death, the loss. And that's when it's way too strong from an unsupported standpoint. Maybe the Lajatati Vashas aren't quite right. But when Saturn is functioning at its best, at its most conscious level, what happens is the person recognizes the reality of the body, the transient nature of life. One of my favorite chants is spirit and nature dancing together, victory to spirit, victory to nature. It goes on, there's some Sanskrit to it. But it's recognizing that there is a transient temporal aspect of the infinite, of spirit, which is nature. It comes and it goes, it cycles through. But then there's also the eternal. And so truth is not just the transient, nor is it just the eternal. It is the dance between the two. So when Saturn is balanced, the person is appropriate. They can see when it's time to let things go, and they let them go. They can see when it's time to dig in the dirt and plant the garden instead. And as the cycles, as the seasons change in a natural fashion, which is related to Saturn, they become at peace with that. Anyone who is naturally attuned to the world of nature probably has a good Saturn. Saturn is also a planet that deals with the D30 Varga, which deals with what? Health. But what are we really seeing in that D30? It's our relationship with nature. The better our relationship with nature on the physical, mental, emotional, psychological, psychic, and spiritual level, the healthier we will be in all circumstances. We will have wisdom, we will have vitality, we will have a body as long as we need it. But it's when we become imbalanced in nature, too excessive in certain areas, that difficulty comes into our life. So Saturn is one of the prime planets related to the D30. It's also one of the prime planets that relates to longevity and health. Why? Because when you are in harmony with nature, the healthier you will tend to be, the more in balance you will tend to be. Anyway, let's get back to truth. So truthfulness allows you to understand what is appropriate in the moment, in the now, in the present. And how do you develop truthfulness? If anything you take from this, aside from the discipline aspect of Saturn and contemplating the other things we've talked about with Saturn, please pay attention to this. Having truth within you, speaking truth, knowing truth, that is the ideal. Now, it's truth as well as you know it. Because once we start getting people thinking, I have the truth, I know the truth, well, then we're in a whole world of problems. But when we recognize that in a particular moment, in a particular situation related to our level of development, we can know truth. We can know what is appropriate. And we have to believe, have faith that that is so, first of all. Most people who are confused, who run around saying, I'm confused, I don't know, well, they're reaffirming that pattern, which means they're going to make more mistakes. They're not going to be as responsible or disciplined. But when people start to say, I am dedicated to truth, I will live and speak the truth to the best of my ability, and they're sincere about it, and they mean it in every circumstance, then truth becomes a current within them, a strength within them, an energy within them. And what happens when that truth becomes a strength or an energy within them is that then not only will they only say things that are true, they will only do things that are in alignment with their natural state, their integrity. They will be authentic. But they will also know the truth. They will also know the truth. You know how this goes. When you've interacted with someone and you know they're lying, there's like an energy to it, a quality to it. Well, the more you are established in truth and doing your best with truth, the easier it is for you to recognize when you're fooling yourself, when you're not having integrity, and hopefully correct it. But also, when other people are around you and they're being misleading or not being truthful, you can spot it because you feel it. You're like, oh, they're either hiding something, or it may be that they're unconscious and they don't know, and that's okay. That's why we have compassion. Saturn's also a planet of compassion. It's exalted in Libra, after all, which is a sign related to the heart chakra and also Venus, because the truth of it is most people are unconscious. Every now and then I see a friend posting something on a social media site, and I recognized the other day, I thought, this person has way too high of an expectation of humanity. It's nice to think humans can be a certain way, but when you get right down to it, most of them are unconscious and are going to try to get away with whatever they can get away with. Not everyone, and hopefully you're blessed with good friends and family around you that that's not the case. But most of the time, let's be a little realistic here. And so she's putting herself through endless frustration in that regard. But the more you develop truth and integrity, the more you recognize it. Now, that also means that you have to grow up a little bit here, because the truth is not an easy thing to maintain until you get the hang of it. Because once you get the hang of it, it becomes like a force. It becomes like a wave that is just pushing you forward versus something that you're fighting. What you're really fighting is falsehood. What you're really fighting is the sense of dissonance that you have because you feel confused, or because you're not being truthful and authentic in regards to who you are. Or you don't know how to do that. You've not been raised to do that. So you have to feel it out. And let me say, this is not to indicate that you are to be cruel to other people. This is not to say that you are to disturb the minds of other people if they're not there looking for something. I believe it's the Gita, or maybe it's Vasishta's Yoga. There's a statement where essentially it says the yogi is not meant to disturb the minds of people who aren't interested in yoga. Meaning you don't go up to someone and say, everything is God, or everything is pure consciousness. If they're not trying to figure that out, you're just going to confuse them, and it might also lead them to do things that are not appropriate. So your truth is for you, meaning if you have boundaries, stay true to those boundaries. Be true to what you know is good and supportive for you. And you can always relate to the yamas and niyamas in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. If you have a question about anything, should I not do something? All you have to do for this mystical path to work is refer to the qualities of the yamas and niyamas. Being harmless, being truthful, not stealing, not being possessive, having contentment, practicing truthfulness, which we keep going over, practicing self-study, paying attention to yourself, surrender in God, and so on. Always refer to those things. In the Yoga Sutras, it defines them as being applicable no matter what time, place, or circumstance you are in. That is your guide. And if you can stay truthful with those as your guide, you will grow in truth, which means you will know what is real. You will know beyond the human condition. You'll know what is beyond the human condition because you know truth. And this is the realm of Saturn. Because people talk about the fire of truth. Well, it seems like fire when you're just a little ego, and all you know is the lies that you spin around yourself to try to keep your little you feeling comfortable. But once you cast that aside, or grow out of it, it's probably a healthier way to look at it, grow out of it, and you become an adult, spiritually speaking, you're more comfortable with the truth. You'd rather be established in the truth than to perpetuate misleading others. And little things can mislead others. Someone says, do you want to go out dancing with me on Friday night? And you don't, because you want to meditate. Well, most people would say, well, sure, I'll go dancing with you, even though they don't really want to. That's not having authenticity. The hardest part is going to probably be with your family. But in time, if you have if you're being authentic with your family, I'm a vegetarian. Oh, but won't you eat meat? Won't you eat meat? Well, rather than saying, well, you're the evil people killing all the cows and the pigs, you just say, no, you do what you need to do. I choose to eat meat, or I choose to be a vegetarian, and that's my boundary. And you stay true to it until eventually respect develops. Why is the planet Saturn considered a planet of greatness? Why is it a planet that deals with respect and authority? Not because of what most people promote of the dominating Saturn, which is going to flog you or skin you alive if you don't listen to it. No, true respect and true authority comes from being established in the truth and authenticity of who you are, and staying true to that no matter what. The more you do that, respect eventually develops, because there's no way it can't. There's no way it can. But it's not out of trying to force your will onto others or to prove you're better than others. It's for your own authenticity, for your own integrity. So these are some things to consider about working with Saturn. It is a profound planet that you need to practice yoga well, to practice any mystical discipline well, because it is the planet of discipline, and you do have to train yourself to grow into a disciplined state. And routine is essential. Truth is essential. Seeing the world for what it is, letting go of the false optimism of Jupiter. It's perfectly okay to be optimistic, because that allows you to see opportunities that you might not have seen before. But you don't want to get lost in over-optimism is what I call it, when you're not established in truth and you think, well, that'll work out, I hope, just because you hope. Hope is not a Saturnine thing. Saturn doesn't hope. Saturn says, let's just see what happens. Again, not out of a morose, morbid thing, or not out of pessimism. It's just, let's see what happens. There's a curiosity there. Because the other truth of Saturn is you can't know everything, and there is a great mystery that life is. And the faith that we develop with Saturn is the faith in life beyond the human mind and the human needs and what the human thinks should be done. And when you can grow into that bigness, that largeness, expand one's consciousness, again, you do develop a greater sense of peace, clarity, and wholeness. So these are ways to work with Saturn. Other things that you can do, because there's so much more we could probably say. In fact, we could probably do a full class on Saturn all by itself. Go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com, and there is a free downloadable course on there on the Sati Sati and Saturn return. Study that. That'll give you a lot of insights. If you're interested in learning more about all of the planets, the Myth and Magic of Astrology course, find the one specifically on Saturn, study that. Get the book, The Greatness of Saturn by Robert Svoboda, and read it and study it, not just to mechanically read through it every Saturday, but to contemplate, what is this main character going through and what lessons can I learn from this? Really get involved in it. I can remember doing many Saturn disciplines when I would fast every Saturday, and I would do it for the number of years I was alive. So for example, if I was 30 years old, then I would do it for 30 weeks. So every Saturday for 30 weeks, I would fast, I would chant mantras to Saturn, and I would reread the entirety of The Greatness of Saturn every Saturday and study it and contemplate it. If I was 40, I would do the same thing, except for 40 weeks. And what this does is it starts to develop discipline. It starts to give you insights into how Saturn functions. And hopefully it will encourage you to start living from a place of discipline, routine, and truthfulness. And then if your life can settle into a good state of orderliness, that will be wonderful. And that will allow you to practice much deeper meditative and contemplative practices so that you can recognize the spirit that is all things, the spirit that we are, that eternal aspect of ourselves, while still honoring and not being deterred by the transient, because that is spirit too, just in a cyclical fashion. So consider this as you continue your study of astrology and mysticism, and recognize that by knowing what the planets are here for, what part of us they represent, and that by you consciously choosing, no matter how difficult it is, consciously choosing to develop those qualities, to bring them into your life, to practice them, to make them a habit. You know, I didn't know how to play the hurdy-gurdy for the most of my life, but eventually I got one. I still didn't know how to do it, but through practice and habit, I figured it out. You can do the same thing with all these experiences related to the planets. It just takes practice, commitment, and habit until it becomes natural for you. So we'll spend a little more time in this discussion. I believe we'll explore Rahu and Ketu as well. However, keep in mind that Rahu and Ketu work through the embodied planets. So in order to understand how Rahu and Ketu needs to be addressed, you really need to understand how the other planets need to be addressed first. Because Rahu and Ketu, they work through the planets. So if they're working through Mars, well, in order to understand how Ketu is functioning through Mars, you kind of got to know how Mars functions first. If Rahu is working through Jupiter, well, in order to understand how Rahu is going to skew or work with Jupiter, you got to know what Jupiter is doing. So you can't look at Rahu and Ketu by themselves. You can't just consider their qualities by themselves, which is reflected in the astrological text. There's very little written about Rahu and Ketu, and there's a reason for that, because they work through these other planets. All right, so be well until next time, and it was a pleasure to speak with you. Om Sham Shaniye Namaha.